Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session, Small Business Drilldown, Startup to Present. It's about Nuflours, a gluten-free bakery. I'm Gunn, I'm the SCORE mentor, and we have Phebe Rossi, founder and CEO of Nuflours on this session. I know folks are going to be jumping in for the next few minutes, but we will get ourselves moving here. We will first start with some housekeeping. This is a recorded session. And during that time, Phebe will also be in the session. So if you want to send her messages, she will try and answer every question she gets from y'all as time allows. At the end of the 45 minutes, it will be a live Q&A with Phebe. She will come right on and you get to see her live instead of recorded. And she can answer those questions at that point in time. So that's the basics to get started here. Another piece of housekeeping, this is going to be a three-part session. There will not be any slides. It's just going to be an interactive discussion between Phebe and myself. The first part is the idea. What generated the emotion and the passion she had for a gluten-free bakery to get going? Where'd that idea come from? Then she's going to talk about her journey. She's been doing this for a number of years. And then from the journey, we're going to transition into what is the future? What would she like it to look like in about 2 years, 3 years, and kind of work ourselves towards that. There's been a lot of changes over the years, like everyone that's been in business, that happens. And for those that are looking to get into business, it's certainly going to be part of your plan going forward to be adept at being flexible with the marketplace as it changes. So with that, Phebe, how are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I am doing just fantastic. So, you know, you and I have been working together now for right at 4 years, believe it or not. It's been a long time, very, very fun. And for those of you that find it interesting to work with a mentor, if you are, Phebe and I have had a lot of fun over the 4 years, and she always surprises me every time with a different set of glasses. So that's what always makes it fun. Anyhow, we're going to start with the first part, the idea. Back in 2008, that was some time ago, 2008, what brought this idea up into your mind and you were passionate about it? What was the what and why you did this?
So I went gluten-free years ago, 2007. And at that point, there just wasn't good gluten-free available in the marketplace. And I had grown up on a farm eating really good food, just really clean, very fresh. And I really missed that. When I went gluten-free, they're just, the products available in the marketplace were dry, they were tiny, a loaf of bread was about this big and in the freezer section. And so, fast forward a year, 2008, and I started developing my own recipes. I realized, oh, wait, I can do this. I know how to feed myself. I love food. And I started testing recipes. Started baking for my friends again. And right about the point where I was, taking cakes to birthdays of friends and they weren't realizing it was gluten-free until I started eating it, I went, aha, not only am I good at this, but there's other people out there that are like me. They can share it with their non-GF friends. And it's just good food that happens to be gluten-free. And so I started developing a business and a business model and then launched the first iteration of Nuflours in 2011.
Cool. Well, I can attest to the quality of what you put out there because one of my favorite desserts is carrot cake, and I happened to be at Phoebe's retail location one time. It happened to be my birthday, so I got some carrot cake, and I'm particular about carrot cake. And I got to tell you what, it was one of the best, if not the best, that I've had as I've traveled around the country and tried out carrot cake in lots of restaurants I go to when I'm doing my own travel for work. So. Kudos to you and finding out from your folks that you were doing this with, that they liked it, you liked it, and off you go. So the journey started in 2011 after you noodled on this for the better part of 2-3 years and folks gave you feedback and you decided to jump off and go ahead and do this. So when you talk about jumping off, were you currently working and this was going to be something you worked on the side, or did you just jump out and just go full tilt?
Mm-hmm. When I was doing the back-end development, so doing my initial set of recipe testing, doing my market analysis, just doing financial assessment, I was working a full-time day job, and that was what I was doing with my evenings. Once I launched the business in 2011, I did not have a full-time job. So prior to business launch, when I was doing development, I was actually living in Portland, and I was assessing the Portland market, the Seattle market, and the Bay Area, because that's where I had, network connections in personal and professional life. And what I came to was that Seattle was the best place to launch, given my lack of financial backing, shall we say, the amount that I had been able to save up. And I calculated it. I gave myself a personal life runway of being able to live off of what I had saved for a few years without paying myself in order to build and develop this brand new business. And it was absolutely a gift I was able to give myself. And then when I launched in 2011, I launched on literally a shoestring budget. I was really doing what I could with very limited resources in order to just, test my original theses. Was there actual interest in the market that I perceived there was? So I was doing that first round of product market fit, shall we say, with farmers markets.
Wow. So I'm going to guess that when you talk about a shoestring, these were baby shoes, right? Not very big, long shoestrings, right? Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning, were you so energetic but got frustrated at all at the pace at which you could move forward? Or how did you feel in the beginning? Or did you feel a little overwhelmed?
Yes, and it was definitely overwhelming. I am a very research-oriented person, so I will dig into something in depth before I launch. But of course, I didn't come from the industry, so there were a lot of things I didn't know about the industry. And so I was learning and growing as I went, both as a business leader and as an individual. But I did get frustrated at the pace. I had to keep on reminding myself that I was getting positive feedback, that I was growing a business. I was continuing to do product market fit, testing new recipes, changing formats. And by changing formats, I mean, we had a really amazing carrot recipe, a carrot loaf, but in a loaf format, it didn't really sell. But if you switch it to a muffin and people will say, oh, carrot muffin, I eat those for breakfast. All of a sudden, boom, you start selling a couple dozen per market and you go, oh, it's what people expect. And so being able to shift and grow, but of course things are always going to move slower and take longer than you want. And you have to be okay with the pace that it sets, or you're just going to be chronically unhappy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the old go slow to go fast routine, right? And it's a journey, not a sprint, right? It's a marathon as you go through this. In the beginning, did you have another partner, a business partner involved in the development and the launch of the business?
I did not. I launched as a solopreneur. And by solopreneur, I mean, you wear a lot of hats. I was doing production. I was, accounting and finance and bookkeeping. I was the marketing. I was the admin. I was all of it. I did bring on a business partner a couple of years into the business. And then I actually ended up buying her out several years ago as well. But you can absolutely do it on your own as long as you understand your own limitations and hire to what you can't do.
Right. Yeah. As long as you know yourself, that is a blessing, right? And accepting who you are and say, okay, other people can do these things better than I, and that's who I need to bring on, and not try and think you can do it all yourself. So you talked about budgets and so on. Was there a point in time early on that you thought you needed to bring in investors or outside funds to help supplement what you'd already had set aside?
Yes, I looked into bringing on external, equity partners, investors very early on, and realized I needed to develop the business more as a brand. It's especially given I was a first-time founder. And if you're looking to do, equity investment, just make sure that you really understand what your objectives are for your company, for your business. And for your brand and what your personal trajectory is. So I did look into it early on, realized that I was way too young as a company, as a brand, and as a leader, and proceeded to really focus on building that more. And we ended up funding in the early days through a series of small loans from a local gluten-free investor who didn't come on as an equity partner, but was able to give me essentially a rolling cash line is one way to look at it. He came by one day and said, "Hey, what do you need? What's your goal for the business?" And I said, "Well, I want to build a national gluten-free brand." And he said, "Wow." And that when I had like this tiny little farmer's market booth, but he saw the vision and he's like, "Well, what do you need right now?" And so that first loan was for $10,000, and that was to help build out a part of our now brick and mortar retail location. And we paid that off. And then he was like, "Okay, what now?" And he gave me a $15,000 loan. And then after that, like we had almost paid that off, but we needed, additional funds for another large piece of equipment. And he would always give us a very reasonable rate. And it ended up like, each time the loan would get bigger and bigger. And he was instrumental in enabling us in the early days to move forward when we were essentially unbankable.
That is so cool. That is very, very cool. Did he also do things like that investment with other businesses? So it's something he was familiar with?
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a really amazing person. He just cares very much about the local food scene and cares very much about supporting local businesses. And he says, I like to live vicariously through other people's dreams. But to me, he's been a huge advocate and supporter of Nuflours and me. But there are other people out him like him out there, people that just want to see local business do well. And it was a good reminder to me, like, just open up your mouth and sing your song. People don't know what your ultimate goal is unless you start telling them. So it's like, "Hey, I'm going to be this thing." And a lot of people will laugh at you, or they'll be like, "You're crazy. Like, you're doing this tiny little thing." But there's going to be those people that see it and understand what you're driving towards. And they're like, "Count me in. I want to be on that party bus."
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's another thing which is don't be afraid of no, right? If you don't ask, the answer by default is no. Right?
Yeah. You tell yourself no. If you don't ask, you don't wait for them to say no.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So as you were going through these first few years, did you run into hurdles that you just had not anticipated? What were some of the biggest bumps in the beginning? You just came out of left field.
Frankly, I don't remember. It's been a few years. But I do have to say that in the early days, I always ran what I call the triple model. So I would run what I perceived as, realistic. We always had very specific goals, around farmers markets, around direct sales, because we were doing holiday sales. And then when we launched the brick and mortar, I had very specific goals around our retail presence and growth there. And then e-commerce when we launched that. So I would run what I considered a realistic model, and then an aggressively positive model, and then if everything went wrong, would we have to close model? What was the most pessimistic we could do in order to stay open, or would we have to close? And so it helped me really understand the back end finance and financial modeling in the early stages of the business for that particular business model we were running at that time. And I would highly recommend, if you don't enjoy spreadsheets, accounting, finance, bookkeeping, et cetera, please bring somebody on sooner rather than later that can be that for you. Hire out to that, because that is what your business is built on.
Yeah, managing the cash flow is absolutely critical. Understanding the ins and outs, right? I can tell you personally, with the clients I still work with around the country, you can be really profitable and run out of cash. It's just how it is. It's the nature of the business at times, and you have to really understand what that means. Because when you started, you really started working out of commissaries, and you had your customers that you already talked about, where you had the farmers markets and then the wholesale distribution. How did you pick your wholesale distribution channels? Because you had the farmers market, but how did you get into the wholesale distribution channel?
Well, here's an embarrassing admission. It was by accident.
It's called good luck. Good luck.
Good luck. Well, when we launched, my timing, I launched financially earlier than I would have liked. I wanted to have a little bit more of a nest egg before I quit my full-time job and launched. But I saw what was happening in terms of food trends. And for those of you hopping into the Wayback Machine, that was when gluten-free was really trending. And I knew that if I didn't launch that year, that I would have to wait several years until I could come up with a different product like market position that was not gluten-free. It would be a gluten-free also. And so I chose to launch at that point in time. And in the early days, we were just doing farmers markets and it was just me. And it was probably around about month 3 or 4. Some local coffee shop owner came by and said, "Hi, do you wholesale? I really want to carry gluten-free. I'm getting a lot of requests for it these days." And I went, "What's wholesale?" And she's like, "Oh, it's when you sell to people like me at a cheaper price so that we can sell it to our customers at a retail price, kind of like what you're doing here." And I was like, "Let me think about that. Let me get your email and get back to you." And so I, go running back to my computer and I figure out a different, pricing structure. And I started wholesaling. And we self-distributed for the first 3 years that we were doing wholesale. And it was all word of mouth. People mostly found us at farmers markets. And then, they would, pop into a cafe and be like, "Oh, what's this? Oh, this is delicious. It's the best gluten-free I've ever had." And then they would call us up. And so we were very fortunate in that we were positioned on the verge of a trend that was blowing up. There was a lot of product. There was a lot of interest in our product type, and we're really good quality. And so it was all of those things. And we just grew completely organically on the wholesale side for about 3 years. And then roundabout year, it was about 3.5, year 4, my then business partner and I sat down and we're like, "We're breaking ourselves. Do we actually want to get into distribution in a real way, or do we need to hand this off to someone else?" And we ran a couple of different financial assessments and then brought on external distribution. And that was back in 2015. And since then, we have developed distribution partnerships with multiple externals to support various types of accounts. So for example, you have, your food service, which is going to be, you can have large scale food service like your colleges, hospitals, hotels. You can have your local food service, so your coffee shops, cafes, restaurants. You can have your retailers like your PCCs, your specialty markets. You can have your large box stores, et cetera. And each distribution company is going to specialize in one particular subset of that. Quite often, unless you're going with a very large distributor, in which case they will want to take it all. But I would say, maybe test the market if you're thinking of adding additional channel. You're doing retail and you're like, "Oh, should I do wholesale?" Well, run the numbers and see if you can afford to. And then maybe just do a little test and see if there's interest in the market. But it is absolutely worth it. The margins are much smaller, but the possibilities and potentials for growth are much, much larger, for at least for us.
Yeah, you want to grow yourself into it, right? Because you can
Exactly.
overgrow yourself and then suddenly you start letting them down and yourself down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen. So 2014, you decided to get into brick and mortar. How come?
Well, several reasons, Ken. Our farmers markets were doing really well. And I really wanted to continue doing that, product market testing, and opening a brick and mortar enabled us to grow a little bit slower, continue to maintain our margins on our retail, and continue to do a lot of product market testing in a very real way. So, fast forward to today, we still have just that one location. We do the bulk of our own production in the back, and it's amazing what you can push out of a tiny kitchen when you're, optimized. And we do product testing. We continue to do that. So some days, we'll have customers come in and we'll be like, "Hey, want to try some cheesecake? Tell me what you think." And we get some really great feedback that way.
How'd you pick the location?
We were looking for preferably a family-owned location. So the location that we have is up on the north end of the Capitol Hill neighborhood here in Seattle. And it's owned by a family trust because we knew the way that we had built the business, it was with a very mom and pop mentality, very community, very local. And to be able to find a company to partner with in terms of real estate management that not only gave lip service to supporting local community, but actually understood what we were trying to do and really support the potential ups and downs that we didn't see in our future, was absolutely what we were looking for. And we did find it. It took us over a year, actually, to find a location that fit all of our needs.
Okay, good. I mean, in other words, you didn't take second best, you went for what you wanted, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's something that folks do need to understand. Sometimes patience is absolutely a virtue, because that for the long term is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. So that's very good for you. So after you've been in business 1 year with retail or 3 years, how did the contribution of both wholesale and retail balance themselves out from
Yeah.
to the bottom line?
Yeah, so it's varied throughout the life of the business. So when we started, our retail was our farmers market business, and that was absolutely 100% of the business. By the time we moved out of our shared commissary kitchen and into our brick and mortar location, the wholesale side of the business was absolutely what kept us afloat, what got us through that first year in that space. And then we just put a lot of, again, word of mouth, guerrilla marketing behind the retail location, and then that really started to take off. And then it overtook the wholesale side of the business, and it's kind of taken precedence ever since. But what we're building on is the back end, the wholesale side of it, and that has actually flipped this year. So it's all about understanding what side of the business you want to support, putting your energies there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Especially when you want to look at total overall growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where do you want to go? But having visited your shop a couple of different times and so on, you did things in the back that helped you optimize what you could do back there, because there's 24 hours in a day, right? So what were some of the adjustments you made as you put focus back into the wholesale side?
We thought a lot about, in terms of like physically, we thought a lot about flow in our space. So when we first moved in, we went, we feel like we have a lot of space, but we know we're going to outgrow it soon. And we've moved workstations, flow around. I can't tell you how many times. We've probably reconfigured every 12 to 18 months, depending on what the focus and what the needs are. So for example, we used to have like a semi-temporary sandwich station because we were doing sandwiches for the cafe counter for a couple of years. But then we finally let that go at the beginning of the pandemic. It just didn't make sense anymore. So it's taking a look at what you're optimizing for. Like, are you building a restaurant that has, 3 dozen or 4 dozen things on the menu? Well, you're going to have to make sure that you have space for that. And then how are you pulling out? Or are you trying to make, 4 pallets of product in an 800 square foot kitchen every 24 hours? How are you going to optimize for that? Where does your product go when it's done? So you have to consider all of those very physical needs. And of course it shifts as your sales patterns shift over time.
Yeah, so I know at one point in time you talked, and you and I both talked at length, where you were thinking about you'd run through the capacity of what you could do there and to seriously look at building your own commissary.
Mm-hmm.
And taking that on, and where others would come in that also are gluten-free and use the commissary. How did you go through that process, and ultimately what did you figure out?
Are you talking about like doing the research process?
Right, when you did the research, do you want to have your own commissary? How did the economics work? And what did you finally decide once you added up how much and what would it really help?
Yeah. So my end assessment, building out a commissary, building out any production manufacturing facility like that takes a huge capital investment. And so if you're doing what I'm trying to do, which is, you're a food manufacturer, or are you a brand? How are you trying to scale? How much of your own, how much of it do you need to own? Really, just thinking about that, and then knowing what your pinch points are and what you need to maintain to actually maintain integrity, quality assurance, all of that. My end assessment was we are not doing a capital investment unless I absolutely reach a point where I can't scale otherwise. We're looking at going for a co-manufacturing model instead. So essentially launching our smaller product lines, doing, product market test fit analysis. And then if we see real potential, handing those off to co-manufacturers. But we have mechanisms in place to make sure that we don't lose control of our own formulas, so to speak.
Yeah, the quality side of it, right? And the formulas. And so that was an interesting process you went through, because I remember the numbers
Mhm.
and what it would take and who you have to come in that would also use the facility to make things work. But when you look at the big picture, which we'll talk about later in this session, it still probably would not have been enough,
Yep. Yeah. And one of the
right?
things I had to ask myself too is, what business am I in? Am I in the business of running a kitchen? Because if I'm in the business of running a kitchen and being a landlord, managing, subleases, all of that, I'm not focused on growing new flowers. And if what I want to do is grow new flowers, what do I need to do in order to actually accomplish that? And it's not running a kitchen.
Right, right. Yeah. So you went through the whole process, but it was a good learning curve, right?
Absolutely.
You learn a lot going through it. And then when you look at others making you successful, the other folks that can do the manufacturing side, it's just a good process to go through. In other words,
Mhm.
don't jump in just because emotionally today you think that's what you should do. I always tell people, you got to believe the numbers, right? And it's
Mhm.
got to match to what you want to ultimately get down to. So let's move away from the physical part of the business, the manufacturing part of the business, the brick and mortar part of the business, and get into what is probably one of the more challenging parts of the business, and that's the people side of the business, right? Putting the right team together that allows you to focus on what you're passionate and really successful at while they can execute on the other side for you.
Mhm.
So I know you've gone through things, you mentioned it briefly with your business partner that you had in the beginning, and that went through its own process of maturation, and eventually you bought her out. But at the same time, you've also been working very, very hard at building out your team to match up what your vision is down the road. How is the process of figuring out your team, your organization gone, and where do you think you still need to go?
Mhm. It's definitely a process. um, it's a lot to unpack. Essentially, what I was looking at, a year and a half ago when I started building out the team that I currently have, is what are the needs for the next 2 years? Because my needs for the next, at that point for the next, 1 to 2 years are very different than at this point my needs are going to be for the next 2 years. My needs for the next 5 years, and so you can really, take a look at, just start looking at people on LinkedIn. What are their skill sets? What can they bring the team? What can you accomplish on a limited budget, limited resources, limited time, um, to get where you need to be? And then your team right now, are they the people that can help you get to where you need to be in 5 years? And so much about building a team is about seeing them as people, seeing them as humans, having compassion, but at the end of the day, also understanding that it's not about emotion. It's not about whether they're good people or bad people or what. Can you as a team accomplish what you need to do? Are you all in the right positions to fulfill the needs of the business? And so it's this constant assessment. And it's actually something that my team and like my executive team right now, and I like do on a monthly or sometimes bi-weekly basis, because we're moving so fast right now. It's like, wait a minute, should I be holding this? Can I be holding this? Or do we need to start, grooming someone else, or, like looking at someone else to come in and join the team, because this position is different than, I originally assessed or hired for. And so it's a constant assessment. But
Yeah. So how many times have you had to go from I think I've got my team to something happened and I have to retool the team? What are some of the examples where that's happened?
yeah. um, Early on in the company, I really wanted to be that company that um, hired people as, like you would come in as the dishwasher, you would come in as the part-time Saturday retail counter help, and that 20 years from now you'd be like a director, or like a C-suite executive, because you had just like grown up and through the company. And I loved that idea so much, of being able to support and develop someone internally like that. um, but what I have had to acknowledge is that I'm a small business, even still. We're essentially a startup. So limited resources and limited ability to train people up into positions that the company has never had. We're in development phase right now. And so a lot of the positions I have available currently are, like I said, positions we've never had before. And so to try and train someone up into that when they haven't had that modeled for them internally means that I have to support a lot externally, and I'm not in a position where I can afford to do that very much. And so I had a few fails, frankly, in internally trying to support people in growth. We just didn't have the resources available. And at the end of the day, my first sales lead is a great example. Like, she's a wonderful person, but we realized that she didn't have the resources available to level up fast enough to do what we needed to do. There just wasn't enough time in the day to get to that point. So yeah, it's really understanding your capacity and your needs and how quickly people can rise to that. And there is no right answer or wrong answer. It's just finding what you need at that time.
Yeah, well, you got to try. You got to swing the bat, right? And
Yep.
you can only interview people. You can only read a resume so deeply and get information. It's when people actually have to start executing and working it that you really learn who you have.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is, right? And you don't worry about that, because if you don't keep trying, one thing I advocate to all folks is, if you realize that things aren't working, don't subsidize the person and have others do work that they should be doing. You have to bite the bullet. As painful as it is, you have to bite the bullet and move on. It's not their fault and it's not your fault. You just mutually agree this isn't working. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tough one to go through. It's a tough one to go through. So here's the other side of the people part of it. And it's not just your team, but it's also your mini me, right? Because I bet you want to take a vacation of some length at some point. I believe that, that's always a positive thing as you work your business. How do you see you developing your next leader under you so that you can really be the strategy cheerleader out there, and this other person can help drive the bus while you get to go out and do what I call the really fun stuff?
Well, we are practically there. I don't have an acting, operations director or anything like that, but we've pretty successfully built as a team kind of the allocation of resources, the allocation of needs. And I don't hold too many pieces regularly at this point. I'd say my job more is conducting the symphony. And so I wear none of the hats, so I wear all of the hats, so to speak. But for the ability for me to just, step away, there's certain times of year you can and can't do that, really. We are a seasonal business. But building into my team the expectation that everyone gets to take a break, including me. It's my reality.
It is, for clients I work with personally, I say, if you were out of the office tomorrow for 30 days and couldn't communicate, how would things work? That's the real test, right? And then unfortunately is something you have to think about, contingency planning, because things can happen.
Yep.
That you have to work through that. I have friends down in the New Orleans market that I've worked with, and they've just gone through a hurricane, and they've had to, because of Katrina, put in some very strong contingency plans, right? To always make things work going forward. Not saying that's going to happen here. I think not, but things can happen. But it's just one of those that you have to work yourself around, and with the right folks, people will step up. So for those folks listening to this, always have a contingency plan. So if something happens, things don't stop. They just will change direction a little bit and come back to where they need to, right? There's always going to be the emotional side that you have to work through. So We've got another, 10, 12 minutes here to go through. And so we're going to move into the third part of this, and it's going to talk about the future, right? Because first of all, one thing that helped probably change some things for you is because COVID hit. So let's talk about COVID as if it was part of the future. But COVID, what did that do to your business initially? And then how did you come out of that?
Mhm. It was incredibly stressful. I'll just put that out there. I think there was some encouragement early on of, oh, everything is fine. We'll find a way through it. And it's like, yes, we'll find a way through it, but this is hard. Um, but I was in the fortunate position in that I had already been building out alternative channels. And so the week before the first wave of shutdowns happened, we had just relaunched our e-commerce platform on our own website. And so we saw a fair amount of our brick and mortar retail customers transition to, buying bread and muffins and such online, and then just shipping them across the city or across the valley. And so that was really supportive. But I did what I thought as a business owner I would never have to do, which was I had to put a lot of my staff on standby. And they completely understood. I've been really conscientious of the way I've built culture. And so it's open communication, and just people are really supportive of each other at Nuflours. And so, by the time I finally had that meeting when I was like, there's really no way I can make this work and maintain even half the staff, I called the all hands meeting, and I was the only one that cried. Because my staff, and like I'm even tearing up just talking about it now, like my staff were like, oh no, we all knew this was coming, and do what you need to do. And when you can call us back, and we'll see if we can do it. And just to have that level of support from my team as a leader just meant so much to me, and it still means a lot to me. So we just we leaned into our alternate channels and just really focused on maintaining that sense of we are here, we are safe. How can we continue moving forward? And then as things started to pick up in the channel a little bit, like we increased our brick and mortar hours. We tried to make sure that coffee shops, cafes, restaurants that we were partnered with knew that our product was still available. We tested a couple of different grocery delivery models. So there were a bunch of partnerships happening very quickly in the early days that we were able to partner with. And so it was just really seeking those alternative channels, those alternative models, and just really leveraging our network of contacts to say, hey, what are you guys doing? Is it working? Is it not working? Hey, here's what I've tried, and it didn't work for me, but it might work for you because you have a different product, or you have a different way that your suppliers run, or whatever. And so there was a lot of camaraderie through the stressfulness of it. And just as a community, my business community just really coming together. And that was really wonderful.
Yeah.
Here we are a year and a half in, and it's a whole new world.
yeah, absolutely. And you were in the right place when it came to planning, because e-commerce was something you just put together, and then guess what? That was something you needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from a timing perspective, it worked well versus
Mm-hmm.
other places had to really adapt to customers didn't come there and they needed everything delivered at home, right? And so it was a little bit different there. So where do you want to be in a couple of years, 2 to 3 years? Paint the picture. What's it look like? What's that landscape look like?
In 2 to 3 years, we are going to be a West Coast brand. Right now, our focus in the next 12 to 18 months is really solidifying our market position here in the Northwest. When we first, relaunched our CPG brand product line last year, it was with a Puget Sound focus. We have some really great support here in the Puget Sound through partnerships with, PCC and such. And we launched down into Oregon early this year. And so we're just really working on a lot of, customer support, customer engagement, really rallying around our brand. And we're working on a California launch in the next, let's see, it's August. It's almost September. In the next 6 to 12 months. So.
Yeah, that small California market, right? Yeah. No, absolutely no. I mean, of all the coasts to roll out gluten-free, as whether you call it the West Coast or left coast, it really doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But it's very conducive to gluten-free.
It is. It is. Well, and there's still, gluten-free isn't, like trending in the same way that it was in 2011, 12, and 13. But the interesting thing about it is it's under this much larger consumer drive for specialty clean label. And so gluten-free has now just become another product qualifier, which to me is really wonderful because the consumer education piece has happened. So we're doing a lot less, hey, what's gluten-free? Oh, this is what it is and this is what it means. And it's more like hey, we're non-GMO, we're, clean label, we're organic, we're preservative free, it's a short shelf life. And that's a good thing because it means that bacteria is doing what it should do to food. But so we're educating more on a overall support of clean label and farmer support. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. We've just got a couple of minutes here. So at least based on the clock I'm looking at. So based on that, if you were going to offer up to the folks that are watching this and understanding what you've been through, and they would take that into consideration for their own brilliant idea, what would you offer up to them?
Well, my biggest piece of advice as a leader is have compassion for yourself. If you're a very driven person, and I'm sure you are, which is why you're going into business, really understand what you need on a personal level and understand what you need for your business and figure out where those align and where they align on an ongoing basis. Your business is active and live, and you are active and live as a person. So you're always going to have to continually reassess that. I wish I'd had more compassion for myself early on. I was very impatient. I was a hyperachiever, and I'm still a hyperachiever, but I'm a little nicer to myself these days.
You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself.
Exactly.
It's quite simple.
Exactly.
Resources, we haven't talked about it, but what resources do you think really helped you out? Yeah, you and I got to chat for 4 years and we've had great discussions, but between SCORE and other resources, where do you think you got your best value in terms of what you got back?
In terms of resources, I really struggled early on. I didn't know where to look. And then I realized there were a lot of resources just out there for free. Like there's the Women's Business Center, there's SCORE, and just like searching just general databases around the city of Seattle and Washington State just for business information. I started using my auditors actually as resources because I realized also after the first year that, King County Health, the WSDA, all of those guys that are coming in to audit you, yes, they want to make sure that you are clean and that you are, properly doing what you need to be doing to generate clean food. But ask them questions or just say, I don't know what I don't know. Can you give me advice? Because they really benefit by making sure you stay in business, and they will absolutely offer information. Another, fun tip, stay on top of your taxes. But don't be afraid of calling the IRS. We went through a couple of different formations. I started as a solopreneur. I brought on a business partner, and then I've since incorporated. And so I spent a couple of years calling the IRS at least once a quarter because, there was a funny form filed or, it took me 2 years to trace down one piece of paperwork. They kept on kicking back to me saying, hey, you didn't file. And I said, yes, I did. Different departments in the IRS, but call them. They are very helpful if you call them and put it on them instead of the other way around. And they're an incredible resource when it comes to government documentation, who to call, all of that. So don't be afraid, just pick up the phone.
There you go. Yeah, the resources, again, just don't be bashful. Mm-hmm. And people want to help. They really, really do want to help. So always take the time to do that. We've kind of come to, I think, very close to the end here. And Phoebe, thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate it. You're going to have fun when we sign off here, where you're going to jump in and get to do live Q&A with those folks. So have a good time with that. To the folks that are on the other end listening to this, all I can tell you is just run after your dream. Don't worry about getting impatient. It will happen. You just have to stay diligent and work through it. There will be bumps in the road. They happen. Guess what? They happen. I've been doing what I do for 25 years, and there's always ups and downs, but guess what? I always had fun doing it, regardless of where I was on that roller coaster. I enjoyed it. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Phoebe, and have fun with the Q&A.